A couple of weeks ago, I posted a video titled The Superman Continuum that talked about things you know about Superman that originated outside of the comics, and also about how popular perceptions and media depictions of Superman depended mainly on three sources. And last week, I talked about how perceptions and depictions of Batman had changed radically over the years. So you may wonder, do our ideas of Batman also harken back to just a couple of sources? In a sense, yes. Much more so than Superman, Batman's depictions in media have drawn major inspiration from the comics themselves, and increasingly so in recent years. Yes, some elements have migrated back to the comics from the big and small screens, like Harley Quinn and the Batcave and Alfred the Butler, but most of the inspiration goes the other way. But if you do not read Batman comic books, then most of what you know about Batman probably comes ultimately from two sources. One, a single comic miniseries outside the normal continuity, and one, not a comic at all. You may already be able to name the two sources I'm thinking of, but you might not know the secret origin of one of those sources. That comes at the end. I'm Tony Frazier, author, blogger, near genius, and this is Hero Go Home presents The Batman Continuum. Let's not waste time in naming our sources. Most of what you know about Batman probably comes mainly from two sources, the 1966 Batman TV series and the 1986 graphic novel Batman: The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller, originally published as a 4-issue miniseries. Let's talk about the second one first. It's hard to overstate the influence that Frank Miller's graphic novel and its companion piece, Batman Year One, with art by David Mazzucchelli, had on not just the Batman, but on popular culture in general. I discussed the basics of the plot last time, but to recap, Bruce Wayne, 10 years after retiring following the death of Robin and the outlawing of superheroes, returns to action in a Gotham City rife with crime and corruption. He battles Two-Face and a street gang known as the Mutants, begins training a new Robin, and has his final confrontation with the Joker, which ends with the Joker dead and Batman implicated for his murder. Superman, the lone remaining superhero working as a covert weapon for the United States, is ordered by the president to bring the Batman to heel. Batman, wearing a special suit of powered armor, fights his final battle against Superman in the streets of Gotham. Even though it was a one-shot story, at least at the time, taking place in an imaginary future of Gotham, it had such an impact that DC published Miller's prequel, Batman Year One, in Batman's regular series the next year, making the prequel official canon. And a year after that, in 1988, when DC offered fans the chance to kill off Jason Todd, the second Robin, I'm pretty sure that death would not have won had The Dark Knight Returns not already basically said that Jason was doomed to die. So by now, if you haven't read the graphic novel, you might think I'm overselling its influence. So aside from its generally film noir tone, what specific things did the graphic novel inspire in later media depictions of Batman? Well, just in the first issue alone, we have Mrs. Wayne's broken pearl necklace, a dead Robin with a permanent display in his honor in the Batcave, a childhood trauma involving bats in a cave under stately Wayne Manor, Bat Shuriken, Batman being pursued by police, and perhaps most important of all, Batman wearing body armor and using a special gun with a grappling line, which would be adapted into Batman's special sculpted body armor suit and an array of customized winch guns in the movies. Later issues would also feature a Batman who shoots, a scene not only homaged in Batman v Superman, but also in RoboCop. A Batmobile, which was basically a tank, an old Batman training a younger successor, as would be seen later in Batman Beyond, both Gotham and Batman being portrayed as psychically toxic, a weirdly codependent relationship between Batman and the Joker, an antagonistic relationship between Batman and Superman, and a final fight between the two, which shows that Batman has been preparing for the possibility of this fight for years. Therefore, a Batman with 1,000 contingency plans. Zack Snyder's Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice was obviously inspired by it. They even quoted the graphic novel directly when the movie was teased at Comic-Con.
I want you to remember, Clark, in all the years to come, in all your most private moments, I want you to remember my hand at your throat. I want you to remember the one man who beat you.
What? And yes, it's true that Christopher Nolan's trilogy uses elements never seen in Miller's graphic novel, like Bane and Ra's al Ghul, but there are enough basic elements, from simple details to the overall dark tone, that Miller's work was obviously a pivotal inspiration. And the influence is obviously felt in the 4 previous Batman movies, as well as the various animated series that have sprung up in the wake of the 1989 Tim Burton Batman's release. But those previous 4 pictures also betray the influence of an earlier inspiration, and one that most modern fans would rather forget. In 1966, Batman became the star of a primetime television series starring Adam West and Burt Ward, a campy comedy version of the Caped Crusaders. The show was a huge hit, featured on countless magazine covers, typecasting West and Ward for pretty much the rest of their lives. I say pretty much because they're still alive, but West is 87 now, and we're getting a new animated film with the voices of West and Ward as Batman and Robin this year. And because the show was such a huge hit, several key features of the show became so ingrained in the public consciousness of Batman that even movies trying to avoid the stigma of the show ended up using elements of it. A lot of people will say, yes, of course, the 2 Schumacher films harken back to the series, with their campy tone, their bright colors, their Dutch angles. But even the 2 darker Tim Burton films contained a lot of camp silliness seemingly inspired by the show. The stunt casting of the villains, the silly props, the outlandish schemes. In fact, what's amazing about the Burton films is in how little they maintained from the show. If you weren't around in the years before Burton's first Batman was released, some people couldn't imagine a Batman movie that wasn't like the show. How could they not use the TV show's theme song, for instance, or the George Barris Batmobile? For many people whose only exposure to the character had been reruns of the TV series, there just didn't seem like any other way to do it, and I'm just guessing that group might have included some movie executives. I would even argue, admittedly with no supporting evidence whatsoever, that some of the goofier aspects of the Superman movies starring Christopher Reeve were also due to the huge influence of the Batman TV series and the sense among non-comics fans that this was just the way comics adaptations were supposed to be done. But even if you're a fan of the later, darker Batman who thinks the 1960s series is a horrible misstep in the character's history that is best forgotten, you should probably rethink. Because the 1960s Batman TV series is the first time that Hollywood did a true adaptation of the source material and proved that it could be successful with a larger audience. Although there had been several previous adaptations of comic book heroes on radio and in weekly theatrical serials, only the second Superman serial, Atom Man vs. Superman, used an actual villain from the comic books, and in that one, Lex Luthor basically acted like any other serial master villain. The Superman television series in the 1950s copied the format of the earlier radio series and used none of the comics' plots or villains. There are several comics with plots very much like episodes of the series, but they all came out at virtually the same time or after the TV episodes were broadcast. The Batman series, on the other hand, drew extensively from the comics' rogues gallery and even adapted several plots from the comics directly for the screen. Even Batman's costume, as much as it is mocked today, was a perfect adaptation of the costume from the comics at the time, much more faithful to the source material than the later sculpted body armor versions. If you are happy that we now have reasonably accurate comics adaptations that draw their villains and even many plot elements from the source material, you have to acknowledge that Batman was there first, proving that it could be done and perhaps more importantly, that it could be financially successful doing so. What's more, if you're a fan of Batman movies specifically, you have the TV series to thank for making him a mainstay in popular culture. 2 years before the series began, Batman's comics were on the cusp of cancellation. An updated approach by writer John Broome and artist Carmine Infantino helped save the comic, but it took the TV series to establish him as an American icon. Which brings me to the point I alluded to back at the beginning. In the Superman Continuum, I showed how subsequent adaptations of Superman had looked back at just a few original sources and tried to imitate their success. Batman adaptations have not taken that same path. They've often been reactions against the previous versions. The Christopher Nolan Batman films were dark and mostly humorless, in part because the campy Joel Schumacher films had been such disasters. But the Schumacher films had been made so campy in part because the darkness of Burton's second Batman film had inspired a backlash, and Warner's wanted to recapture the success of the zany 60s series. You could argue that Burton's films were so dark in part because he wanted to avoid the campy stigma associated with the 60s series. If this is true, then could the Batman TV series have been a reaction against something even earlier? Yes. Before the 1960s TV series, Batman was adapted to live action in 2 Columbia serials in 1943 and 1949. Neither one is very good, even by the standards of movie serials, but the first one helped to inspire the later TV series. In 1965, the first serial was re-released to theaters in a feature format as An Evening with Batman and Robin. According to Wikipedia, it was the re-release's popularity among college students that inspired the new TV show. But Dial B for Blog attributes it to a showing of the film at a party thrown by Hugh Hefner, at which an ABC executive was present. In either version, the old-time serial provoked Mystery Science Theater 3000-style hilarity, so the idea to make a TV series lampooning it seemed natural. I'm inclined to think both stories are true, that the Hefner party gave the executive the idea, and that its popularity with college students proved it could work for a larger audience. Whatever the inspiration, you can see the serial's influence in the TV series itself. It was broadcast twice a week on Wednesday and Thursday nights, with the Wednesday episode ending in a serial-style cliffhanger, and the Thursday episode starting with a recap and then showing how the dynamic duo get out of their tough spot. The show obviously grew beyond its serial roots, but you can see its origins right there in the format of every single episode. And that's it for me. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you liked this video, please pass it on to your friends, and if you would like to see more, hit the subscribe button. For more commentary on films and comic books, visit my site at herogohome.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at TonyFrazier1. I'm Tony Frazier, and thanks for watching.